With the first pick in the NBA draft, the San Antonio Spurs select.
After all the tanking, after way too much Skylar Mays and Chris Dunn, we finally have the official order for the 2023 draft, a draft that just might completely alter the landscape of the league going forward. Because of that, we're going in ascending order, and at the bottom, we're moving quickly. This area is still subject to a ton of change before draft night. Right now, you're going to see a vastly different group of players across all the different outlets. Draft Twitter kids are going to be endlessly debating this area, but we're still really early on in the process. The Pelicans are at 14. Going guard seems to be the betting favorite, and out of their options, they end up with Nick Smith Jr., someone that came into the year mocked as a top selection, but with the help of a knee injury, really struggled to score consistently, leading to this position. The Raptors are officially at 13. This range is always so hard to predict. You've got a ton of prospects legitimately in contention, and these teams are typically fringe playoff teams, increasing the chance that they go conservative. But with the Raptors facing a lot of their core's contracts coming to a conclusion, they actually go upside. In this case, it's Keontae George. Similar to Smith, George is a solid athlete whose efficiency was not great, but it's the blatant scoring talent that has scouts willing to take the chance. The Thunder are at 12. I think this is one of the more interesting spots in the draft. This is a team that had a very clear strategy since Kevin Durant's departure, valuing upside over anything. But after making the play-in this season, there's no tanking in sight for this franchise. They also already have a significant amount of their roster dedicated to project players. So here they play it fairly safe, going with one of the faces of the national champion UConn Huskies, Jordan Hawkins. He is someone that has a case for the best shooter in the entire draft. He's not the athlete that most of the guys in this range are. He has an extremely thin frame, but he still has great length, improved a ton attacking the rim, and no one has to question his shooting. His contested shot-making ability was truly historic. His off-ball movement was a cornerstone of UConn's offense, and it's ultimately why the odds of him making an immediate impact are so intriguing. He should be going way higher than this, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. The Thunder play it safe in the eyes of many, but truly aren't sacrificing an ounce of upside. The Magic are at 11 with their second lottery selection. Orlando has already invested a lot of draft capital into their backcourt. That's not stopping this season. They go with Kentucky point guard Cason Wallace. There's a lack of confidence in him being a volume scorer, but he's got a decent shot from outside, and his defense seems like a foregone conclusion. He is one, if not the best on-ball defenders in this class. The Mavericks avoided disaster last night. They held on to their 10th overall pick and now walk away with a prospect that skyrocketed up the board this season, and for very good reason. 6'9" UCF forward Taylor Hendricks. He's a great athlete and versatile defender that put up 15 a game, shooting 39% from 3. It doesn't take a genius to see why he's climbing up the board. He screams Jaden McDaniels, Jeremy Grant. Alongside Luka, you've got to love this fit. The Jazz are at 9 and grab possibly the safest prospect in this range. Lights out shooter, Kansas shooting guard Grady Dick. Grady was one of the best shooters in the country all season. He finished the year eclipsing the 40% mark while taking 6 attempts a game, both on and off the ball, a feat few freshmen have ever pulled off, especially while playing at a top program like Kansas. You tack on a 6'8" frame, you've got a top 10 pick in the draft. At 8, we've got the Washington Wizards finally addressed the point guard spot, going with Anthony Black. As a freshman at Arkansas, he averaged 13, 5, and 4. As a scorer, the expectations aren't too high, but the floor-to-ceiling combination is elite. He stands as a 6'7" point guard with incredible ability and tendencies as both a playmaker and defender. The biggest concern right now is the shooting beyond the perimeter, but his clean shot form has given many confidence in that changing quickly. The comp coming up over and over again is Lonzo Ball. The Wizards finally don't get overexcited about college scoring production and draft an elite profile. 7 belongs to the Pacers, a team that a year ago walked away with 2 extremely promising guards. Now they look elsewhere and draft someone that's been projected in this range all season. Villanova's Cam Whitmore, someone that's coming in with an NBA-ready 240-pound frame. Scoot Henderson is the only other prospect in this draft with a remotely comparable physicality at the rim. If his shooting improves and he could comfortably play on the wing, he has a real chance to exceed even this high of a draft position. The Orlando Magic are at 6, and as things are shaping up right now, it seems like this spot is pretty safe to project. They'll likely end up with whichever of the Thompson twins is on the board. And of the 2 6'7" hyper-athletic twins that played in the Overtime Elite League this season, they end up with Asar Thompson. A majority of both stocks is made up from their frame, athleticism, and fluidity possessing the ball, but Asar's bringing more of a wing skill set to the table, more shooting or at least willingness to shoot. The Magic now walk away with 2 much-needed additions to this backcourt. Man, you've got to feel for Pistons fans. They lost their young star due to injury, but at least they were getting the worst record in the league, the top odds in the lottery, the worst case scenario being the 5th overall pick. But after we saw 9 straight selections go by exactly as projected, the Pistons were the first team to move, ending up with the worst case scenario 5 spot. Here their decision seems to be shaping up to take one of the available Thompson twins or Houston's Jarris Walker, which is ultimately the route they go with. There's no question they've been aggressively adding to their front court recently, drafting guys like Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren, while also taking chances on recent top picks like Marvin Bagley and James Wiseman, but that's not going to stop them here. They take the risk that Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey can be the elite offensive duo they've envisioned and go with a great fit for those two. The thing that jumps out for Walker is the frame, 6'7", 250 pounds, and a 7'3" wingspan. You pair that with just 11 points a game, and most first impression is that his stock is nearly all defense, but that isn't necessarily the case. It's the cornerstone with his elite strength to mobility ratio, but that alone would not get him drafted this high. It's his offensive upside at this NFL-like frame that's really been intriguing, between his okay production as a spot-up perimeter shooter, his incredible second pass ability, really just anticipatory playmaking in general, and then some of his scoring moves like his turnaround mid-range or his floater off the dribble that you just really don't see from a player with this kind of frame. Walker joined a top Houston team this season where he didn't have the comfortability of being a pick and roll big. That just wasn't a part of their offense, but he still found a way to shine on both ends of the floor. No prospect in this range is coming without concerns, so the Pistons grab a guy that's defense and playmaking could make him the perfect addition to Cade and Ivey, but the door's still open for him to actually be a reliable shot creator. Really past the top 3, this draft is just flooded with these high upside, great physical profiles. This lottery features some of the least perimeter scoring production we have seen in a very long time. This is most likely going to cause some super surprising selections. A team that could be making one is the Houston Rockets. They were extremely disappointed with the outcome of the lottery. After finishing with the second worst record, they end up at 4. As of now, they're clearly favored to go in the direction of Amin Thompson or Jarris Walker, but there's a fairly big pool of players in contention here. Ultimately, they end up with Amin Thompson, who brings elite athleticism, size, and slashing just like his brother. The main difference, and ultimately what the Rockets would favor here, is the role he's historically played alongside his brother as the point guard. Not just that, but he's an elite floor general. The shooting will be a concern, but for someone whose offensive game is so fluid and calculated, it's hard to imagine that not being a hurdle he can overcome. The Rockets' defense this season was atrocious. Going forward with KPJ and Jalen Green, sharing the court too often is just not a viable option. So here they grab a guy that counters a lot of Green's faults while possibly still taking the most upside on the board. It's hard to overestimate how tough of a result this was for Houston, given their current pick situation. Right now, their first rounder next season is most likely going to Oklahoma City. It's got a top 4 protection, but that's hard to count on. We just saw the worst record in the league fall outside the top 4. The dream scenario was landing one of these top 3 picks, their third in 3 years, and then using their vastly available cap space to start getting aggressive and put this full-on rebuild in the past, especially with not only their 2024 pick in control of Oklahoma, but also their 2026 one. Now they could still do this being at 4, but there's just a lot less room to be confident. There's some scary scenarios ahead for them. If they're putting out a similar roster next season, there's a very real world where they're handing the Thunder a selection as high as the 5th overall pick in the draft. The team is much more than a coaching change and Amin Thompson away from turning things around. We've seen the big-time free agent rumors such as James Harden, but these types of situations, again, are hard to count on. Most of these scenarios usually result in striking out on the big names and then overpaying the others out of fear of handing over a top pick. Now we enter the top 3, where there is a clearly defined line from the rest of the prospects. That team holding the 3rd pick is the Portland Trailblazers, who end up with Scoot Henderson. Now this situation is fascinating. Similar to the Rockets a year ago, if they're still here when it comes time to make a selection, their decision will be made for them. They'll be selecting whoever's available between Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson. In this case, it's Scoot, someone that was mocked as a top selection well before the season even started. The point guard is a deceiving 6'2", as he also has a 6'9" wingspan. It takes mere seconds to see why he's miles ahead of the next point guard in this class. He was gifted with a ridiculous burst and ability to just fly out of the gym. He needs very little room to put anyone on a poster. Think young Derrick Rose or Russell Westbrook. He's a wizard in traffic, keeping the ball on a string, which comboed with the attention he attracts from opposing defenses makes his playmaking look effortless. His shooting off the dribble, especially in the mid-range, is promising. The perimeter shooting has a ways to go, but after seeing the recent success of guards with similarly limited skill sets like SGA and JimmerRange, no scout is hesitating to have him as the top point guard in this class. But man, is this a weird landing spot. 99% of the time, a prospect this caliber is walking into a scenario where they get to run the show. Going to Portland, that won't be the case. In fact, he's probably coming off the bench. Right now, the Blazers have Damian Lillard under contract till 2027. To make things even more complicated, his 23-year-old co-star Anthony Simons shares the backcourt with him and stands at just 6'3", leading to very little positional flexibility. As the roster stands right now, it's hard to see a world he can crack the starting unit. This odd scenario, combined with Jeremy Grant's impending free agency and this team still being several moves away from actually making a deep playoff run, might force the Blazers' hand. They need to make a decision: rebuild or actually try to compete with Lillard. Right now we're seeing a lot of debates on both what the Hornets should and will do on draft night. If they do end up going Scoot, things become a lot less complicated for Portland. Scoot is the level of prospect that certain front offices could just become infatuated with, draft, and figure out the fit later. The one trend that is completely bulletproof and undeniable in the draft is drafting fit over talent is and always will be a mistake. But in this specific instance, with most having Brandon Miller and Scoot neck and neck as we get closer and closer to draft night, the Hornets do end up going Brandon Miller at 2. It's a selection that not only makes more sense on paper, but actually comes with a higher ceiling for this team when you consider the value of hitting at the wing position opposed to the point, especially for a franchise that has a point guard that won Rookie of the Year a couple seasons ago. LaMelo was hurt for a majority of this season, but in the 36 games he played, he averaged 23, 8, and 6, shooting 38% from 3 while taking over 10 attempts a game. Here, they're pairing him up with nothing short of an incredible wing prospect in Brandon Miller. It's fascinating how polar he's become in this draft. It most likely stems from people taking the hard stance between him or Scoot, but there's a lot to like here. The 6'9" freshman led Alabama to the top seed in the NCAA tournament. He averaged 19 points and 8 rebounds. The foundation of his game is his elite ability behind the arc. He took nearly 8 threes a game while shooting 38%. Overall, his offensive game just doesn't have much to complain about. Attacking the rim became a bigger part of his game deeper and deeper into the season. He had strong flashes in the pick and roll as both a scorer and playmaker, something many deem one of his biggest strengths. While in college he was a respectable defender, it is that end of the ball that is the most common concern brought up. The lateral quickness and decision making are there, but it's the twig frame that has scouts concerned about his effectiveness on that end with the physicality jump of the NBA level. But for players that don't come into the draft with defense being a cornerstone of the skill set they bring to the table, there might not be a harder thing to predict in the draft. What we do know is that he's a special offensive talent. Don't take for granted this kind of perimeter production from a 6'9" freshman. It doesn't come around very often. A very interesting scenario is brewing in Charlotte. They've got some contract decisions to make. Defense has to be added to this group at some point, but we could see them get LaMelo back healthy, land a top-end wing prospect, and potentially bring back Miles Bridges after the remainder of his suspension. Someone that when we last saw him was averaging 20 a game. The group has a long ways to go. They probably have a lot more top picks headed their way, but I think there's some room to be hopeful. Something that really might not have been the case had they ended up outside the top 3. Now, most of the time, landing the second overall pick in the draft feels amazing, but man, did it have to burn for Charlotte fans being one spot away from possibly the best prospect of a generation, maybe even all time, Victor Wembanyam. Going that far, which we saw the ESPN desk with Woj at the lottery doing, is a little ridiculous, but without the assumed injury risk, there would be a very strong case to be made. We have never seen a prospect like this before. We've seen 7'4", but we have never seen a player with even a similar frame with coordination and skill of someone that is 6'7". This is someone that can dribble out of traffic, run in the open court, hit threes, get them off whenever, wherever he wants to. But defensively, his ability to move laterally at the speed he does, paired with a record-breaking 8-foot wingspan, truly might be the scariest part of his game. Spurs fans, just take a second to appreciate how lucky you are. If they're not already jealous yet, every single fan is going to envy the ability to watch Wembanyama leading their favorite team. The Spurs rebuild ended overnight. Now, a lot weren't thrilled about this landing spot, but it wasn't the worst case scenario. The face of this roster is Keldon Johnson, someone that this season has averaged 22 a game, and we've seen those numbers go up every single season with no signs of it slowing down. Their piece that everyone seems to be forgetting about due to his absence from the court for most of the season is Devin Vassell. We were seeing a breakout before his knee injury. He averaged nearly 19 points a game. Sometimes box score production can be deceiving from these teams at the bottom of the league, as inevitably someone has to shoot the basketball, but this wing duo is nothing to laugh at. Trey Jones is a respectable point. Their top pick from a year ago, Jeremy Sohan, brings a ton of versatility, and then they've got a bunch of other guys that at least have intriguing upside. Now, cumulatively, I want to make it very clear this is not a good group, but when you consider the team's historical ability to build competitive teams and keep people around, their contract situation, their sneaky good pick pool, and the lack of egos on this team, I think this is a core that's actually a pretty decent starting point for Wembanyama reaching the goals and expectations set out for him.